Welcome, everyone, to the AERA EF Lindquist Lecture, one of the most prominent of the American Educational Research Association held each year. I am Felice Levine, Executive Director of the American Educational Research Association, and I am pleased to introduce this event. We are thrilled to see so many of you joining with us at this moment. This lecture was originally scheduled to be given at the 2020 AERA annual meeting by the winner of the EF Lindquist Award, bestowed for outstanding research in the field of testing and measurement. While sadly the pandemic led to the cancellation of the 2020 place-based annual meeting, we are honored to broadcast virtually worldwide across time zones and hemispheres, and engaging more than 2,000 of you in this collective opportunity to listen and engage with Dr. Mark Wilson and his thought-provoking scholarship today. Dr. Wilson's talk could not come at a more apt time, as school and policy leaders across the country and around the world strive to determine how to best assess the short and long-term educational outcomes of students from all backgrounds, in particular, those from underserved communities at this challenging time. This challenge has grown as a result of the disruptions and the delays and the dislocations of COVID-19 pandemic, which continue today. Following Mark's talk, there will be an opportunity for audience Q&A, and we encourage you to start entering your questions as Mark is talking. We ask that those of you post the questions in the Q&A box, and those will be moderated by Dr. George Wimberly, AERA's Director of Professional Development and our Diversity Officer. I also want to thank in advance Krabowski and Julie for the ASL interpretation, and for Christine, who's doing the live closed captioning. And I am most pleased to introduce Dr. Guillermo Solano Flores, who is our chair for this event and chaired the EF Lindquist Selection Committee. Dr. Solano Flores is a professor of education at Stanford University Graduate School of Education. He too specializes in educational assessment and the linguistic and cultural issues that are relevant to both international test comparisons and the testing of cultural and linguistic minorities. His own significant and groundbreaking research is based on the use of multidisciplinary approaches that use and combine psychometrics, sociolinguistics, semiotics, and cognitive science. Welcome, Willie, and I'm pleased to turn the program over to you.
Thank you very much, Felice. I am very pleased to be here and to introduce Professor Mark Wilson, the recipient of the EF Lindquist Award, whose talk today is titled Finding the Right Grain Size for Measurement in the Classroom. Mark is a professor of education at the University of California, Berkeley, and also at the University of Melbourne. Mark is being honored for his important contributions to the field of educational measurement, especially for his work on the development and application of innovative approaches for measurement in education and the social sciences, the development of statistical models suitable for specific measurement contexts, the creation of instruments to measure new constructs, and the philosophy of measurement. His work has had an important impact in policy, especially in broadening the ideas about assessment data in the classroom. Mark has published, as of this morning, 165 refereed articles, 74 invited chapters in edited books, and 15 books in the field. Congratulations, Mark.
Thank you, Willie. I greatly appreciate your introduction. It's a wonderful thing to be honoured by one's colleagues. I think it's the highest tribute that can be paid is when one's colleagues acknowledges what one's done, and I duly greatly appreciate that. Thanks also to Felice and her very able team at the AERA. They've been getting this all set up and coaching me and making sure I'm sitting in the right place and into the right light and so on. So thank you to them. So good morning to those to my west, good afternoon to those in California, and good evening to those to my east, in particular the East Coast, of course, but also in Europe. I saw all those hellos go by on the chat. It was really heartwarming to see so many people I know, some I don't. Good that you could make it. And I'd particularly like to thank those of you who were there for the previous attempt at this in April. And sorry, it didn't work then. I'm on track here now, and thanks for coming back. I appreciate it, especially those people who came back. So let's see, I'll share my screen. It'll take me a minute to get that up. And I'll get going on the talk. So the title is Finding the Right Grain Size for Measurement in the Classroom. And just to help orient you, I'm going to give you a quick outline. I'm told this is the right thing to do. So I'm going to start off by explaining that title, just in case it wasn't entirely clear. It was meant to be a little vague. So I'm going to explain what I mean by in the classroom, what I mean by measurement in the classroom, and what I mean by grain size. And then I'll go on and start giving you some examples. First of all, at the meso level, an example using something called BAS. Then at the micro level, something using something called TOTS. And then I'll bring those two together and that'll be it. I did start off with a somewhat longer talk, but I've cut it back to, I hope, about 25 to 30 minutes. So there will be time for questions and answers. So I do really want to hear what you've got to say and what questions you have. So please do send in those questions to George. So in the classroom, what do I mean by in the classroom? Well, this is a picture of one of classroom that I taught in. It's actually a grade 5K at a school in the suburbs of Melbourne that I taught in 1976. And they were putting on a play. And I've chosen this one because I want to emphasize the fact that the classroom isn't just the classroom. It's what goes on to teach students, and in particular to teach them in groups, an important aspect of it. The play was called Ned Kelly, Dan Kelly, and the Three Kate Kellys, and how they got their just desserts. And in case you don't know, there's Ned Kelly there. He's in his body armor. And he's being interviewed. It's a little ahistorical, this, because this actually happened before we had television news, but that's a television newsman interviewing him about his adventures. Here's a little bit of the text that came from it. The students wrote their own words for this. They came up with the settings. They designed the action, and you can see some real Ned Kelly type action going on here. It was all done in a large open area, playing field and so on. And the students loved putting it on. And I was one of the camera people making the recording of it. And this is what you're seeing. Their favourite scene, by the way, was this last one. This was Ned Kelly getting his just desserts. You can see the three Kate Kellys are in the corner there, and they're not very happy about the whole situation. So that's what I mean. A classroom is a place where complex things happen, where we want to try and teach students things we hope that are important that they will learn. Now, this is the truth of this. I was actually doing teacher training during this, and so I did know exactly what I should be teaching because they made me write it down. And here's 4 of the things I was trying to teach. Story structure, making your story interesting, taking a historical perspective, and increasing student interest in history. I think we did most of that. We did a pretty good job. But here's the question I had at the end of it. How did I know that I'd done a good job? What told me that I'd done a good job? This is a question that troubled me when I went later and on. I went beyond teacher training, became a real teacher, had my own classroom, and I still didn't know how to tell whether I'd done a good job or not. And I feel that this was an important gap in education. We know how to do big scale standardized tests. We do them all the time, but that doesn't really relate to the things I was trying to teach here. No standardized test relates probably to any of them, maybe story structure a little bit for some, but the sort of things you actually want to teach are not well assessed by the things we call standardized tests, which compromise most of what we do when we create measurements and assessments. So I have been working since then in many ways, in many dimensions, to try and find ways to bring a measurements perspective into the classroom. I don't want to say that everything should be measured, but I think we should be able to measure some things. We should be able to give information to teachers to help them. We should be able to find out, to allow the teachers to find out whether they did a good job or not. To help people who are designing curricula to find out whether they really taught the things they really wanted to teach. So that was the thing that I was worried about when I started down this road. Now, what do I mean by grain size? Well, this is something I thought about when I was a teacher, and I still think the same way. I think there are multiple levels, but 3 levels can fairly well be judged. Right down at the fine-grained assessments, what's going on in the classroom each day, each hour within the classroom. Teachers are making observations about how their students are progressing, how groups of students are progressing. Are they getting where I want them to go? I call that the micro level. There's a level somewhat above that. I call this the meso level. It's the one where you're thinking about planning. You want to assess, well, did I get that done last week? Did I really attain that understanding of story structure that I wanted to convey as we were planning the play? And of course, there's this final level, the macro level, summative testing, standardized testing, has lots of names. This is the one that attaches to the broader standards. I'm not speaking against that, but in fact, I'm only really going to talk about the top 2. There are important relations of what I say to the final one, but that's not a story for today. I'll tell that another day. So I'm going to talk about an example project. It's one of several that I've been engaged in over the years, where I've been trying to develop this idea and figure out how it works. This is an NSF-funded collaborative research project called Modelling Assessment to Enhance Teaching and Learning. Triumphs under the initials of MATEL. We never use that. I used to call it the Geometry Project for reasons you will see. But more importantly, it was a collaboration, and still is a collaboration, by the way. We haven't managed to finish yet, between Rich Lehrer and Leona Schauble and Corey Brandy at Vanderbilt University, and myself and Perman Gochiev at UC Berkeley, as well as a bunch of graduate students at both universities. The products of this project are several, but 3 are really important ones that I want to put up there. These are the things we're aiming at. The first one is what we think of as a shared conceptual framework for describing the instructional goals and valued aims of teaching and learning. The learning progression, we call that. The second is a set of electronic tools to help educators detect, share, analyse and interpret that information. And we've got 2 pieces of software for that, one called BAS and one called TOTS, and I'll go into that in more detail. The third is a classroom and school level community professional development program to support and sustain the practice of assessing to guide instruction. Now, the first and the last of those are really the contribution of Rich and Leona. They're the ones who've really built the instructional system. They're the ones who do the professional development. My part of this is the assessment. I do want to point out that, and I put a little asterisk there and here to say that you can find out about those parts. If you look at this, there's a talk here by Rich Lehrer and also a paper by myself and Rich in Frontiers in Education came out this year. They'll give you more details about that. I don't have enough time to give you that background. You'll hear a little bit of it, but I'm concentrating on the assessment and measurement. So what are the topics that we're going to look at here? We're looking at measurement in 4 areas in particular: length, area, volume, and angle. How do we teach kids about measuring those things? And thinking about them then as a model, as a way to enliven their understanding of rational numbers, in particular fractions as quantities and fractions as operators. So that's the thing we're building towards. We've done most of the work in the first 4 parts, and the last one is still being worked on. I'm going to concentrate on length today. That's I think the most straightforward one, the one that we all know most about. And of course, it's also a basic idea of measurement. So, first of all, if you want to measure things, you better have something to measure. And so we've got a construct here which we call theory of measurement, length. And of course, there's 3 others for the other 3 areas of measurement that we're working on. And it's really trying to describe how children come to constitute a theory of measurement, how to compare magnitudes or extensive lengths. A theory of measurement refers to the web of big ideas and procedures involved in developing these comparisons. We express it as a construct map. And here's a picture of that construct map that goes with theory of measurement length. And we have this little abbreviation for it, TOML. It starts at the bottom and works its way to the top. That's the image of increasing in sophistication. So they start off with the first thing you can always do is compare 2 measurements, compare 2 lengths, and just directly compare. One's bigger than the other, one's shorter than the other. As they move towards measuring the length, they're starting to think about units and their roles in accumulation. After a while, they start to say, well, how do we iterate those units? And how do we symbolize that? We go on beyond that to think about partitioning and iterating, and they use first halves and then thirds. They refer to the halves as 2 splits and the thirds as 3 splits, and it sort of goes on and on from there. But eventually you want to get right to the top here of this generalizing relationships. Measure of A in B is the reciprocal of the measure of B in A. And we're going to talk about that top end a little bit later. So these construct maps I'm talking about, it's not meant to portray every nuance of learning. It's not a big detailed map of everything about it, but it's about highlighting the critical conceptual and procedural attainments that you need to make. Each of those levels that you saw just a minute ago is composed of many sub-levels. I'm going to show you a few of them, but there's too many to take in a short talk, so I won't concentrate on them much. The sub-levels are not regarded as a ladder. They need to accumulate in a rather round, sort of going around and around a bit, but the levels, the idea of the levels is that they do in fact accumulate. And in fact, what you learn at a lower level, they're the resources for what you're going to learn at the higher level. So at each level, you sort of turn around and go, oh, well, yeah, I can take that and make more of it. So there's the construct map again for TOML. I'm going to concentrate on these 2 in blue, level 2 and level 3 of that, explaining properties of units and their role in accumulation, and iterating units and symbolizing distance traveled. We did, in fact, work all the way through these in the program, but I'm going to concentrate on these because these were the early ones, and I think they carry the ideas quite well. So here's part of a sort of picture of some of that. The sort of things that concepts we're going to work on are, if you think of a 3 on a standard ruler, we can see it marked here. But the important thing is it's marked at the end point of the third. It's not in the center. It's this point here on the ruler. The idea is that what you're measuring is the distance traveled as you're making that length measurement. And it's a similar, for instance, for angle. It's the distance moved as you move around an angle. And the idea is that the understanding of this is the beginnings of understanding measurement scale, ways of specifying relations among the units to mark quantities. Students get to understand the measure of 10 times that unit, little u there, means that the measured length is 10 times as long as the length of 1 unit. And this is where we start to bring this idea of rational numbers in, a measure of 10 units implies that the length can be subdivided into 10 congruent parts. And so that's a beginning to that idea of fractions, rational numbers. When students are working on this, they haven't really got this idea of a sort of reciprocal relationship there, that a unit is 1/10 as long as 10 units. So that's something that's the build-up towards fractions. It's one of the reasons this is so important. It's important in itself to learn about measurement, but it's a wonderful foundation for rational numbers. So that's a background there in the aim. Now, let's look at these different levels of assessment. The meso level, first of all, this is this one in the middle, We delivered that online using something called the Berkeley Assessment System Software, or BAS. It's for those who want to know the psychometric side of it, it's a multidimensional Roche model, and we use the Conquest software and the BAS software to actually estimate it and use it in the assessment system. And in particular, it's multidimensional because there's one dimension for each of those construct maps: the length, the area, the volume, and the angle. As again, I'll just be talking about length today. So here's an example of an item. This is a pretty easy item down here at the level 3, really the bottom of level 3. You can see here's and we'll see that this actually matches what goes on in the classroom in certain ways. So here's one of Maria's footprints. She uses copies of her footprint to make this foot ruler, but Maria forgot to label her foot ruler. So the idea is that the student has to drag on the numbers onto the foot ruler to label the units, and you're supposed to just use the numbers that you need. So this is a drag and drop type item. We're taking a little bit of advantage of the fact that it's done on the computer, it's done online. So some of the items make much more use, but this is a rather mild use of that. What we do with the results of these is we build a map then of the whole system. And here's a picture of that. We call this a right map. It's also called an item map. The way you read these is from bottom to top. So students start at the lower level of understanding measurement of length down here, and they move to the top. And this is actually a histogram of how the students are located. These are all the students in the project, so there's quite a lot of students here. What we then show along the bottom here are the items. There's one item in each of these columns, item 1, 2, up to item 15. And what we're showing is the location of each of the responses to these items. Some items just have right, wrong. Some items have several levels. For instance, this item here has 2 levels. Some have more. They have been keyed in the development to the different levels of TOML, theory of measurement length. And so what that allows us to do then, when we see them line up, as in fact they do here, you can trace where students are learning a particular topic. And so the students who are here, for instance, at this level, at level 4, these students here are the ones learning that. The ones below, that's these students here, they're learning level 3, level 2, level 1, and of course, right at the top end, level 5. Not many students up here at level 5, of course, but that's quite normal for this sort of innovative project. Level 5 was pretty advanced for these kids. I want to emphasize these are not mastery, but active learning maps. So the idea is here that these kids here are the ones who are learning these topics, these levels indicated by these items here. Now, so we use these maps to label the achievement of the students. And here's a picture then of a report back to a teacher of this. And we can see that the levels are across the top here, from yellow, brown, orange, brownie orange to another yellow, for levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the students in this grade are indicated by these little dots. They're indicated here just by numbers. That's for privacy. Of course, in an actual report back to a teacher, they will get their students' names. And each student location is given by one of these dots, which you can see here. And the uncertainty about that is shown by the confidence band around it. They're pretty narrow, these bands. That's because we've given them 15 items in this case to try and make sure we really do know where they are. And we can see quite well that for these students in this class, this was a post-test, by the way, they're in fact fairly strongly embedded in level 3. There's some variation in level 3. It's not a totally consistent thing because kids do get better within each of these levels. And there's a small number of students who are back here at level 2. There's no one really solidly in level 4 of those. You can see level 4 is just starting to be taken up by some of the students. So this is one sort of class summary that you get out of that sort of meso level information. It's the sort of summary you need to know what to do next week, perhaps, next month, or for the sort of material that will need that level of understanding measurement of length. I want to now focus on the lower level, the micro level. In order to do this more clearly, this is much more embedded in the classroom, so I'm going to introduce a topic in the classroom. In fact, I'm going to talk about a particular teaching or learning day. So on day one, the teacher had the students working out in the hallway around the classroom with clipboards and dowel rods and with their feet, and they were measuring different sorts of lengths, different distances all around the place. This was aimed mainly at that level 2 we were talking about and sort of giving them experiences that would lead them into level 3. There were plenty of types of units, so they were experimenting with different types of units as they did this. This is sort of experiential start. As they're doing that, the class is observing the other students because the teacher's going around taking photographs of what's going on, and then at the end they're engaged in a whole class conversation about what they observed and the sort of thing they note. For instance, that if you use shorter units, you get a greater measure, you get a bigger number. And of course, there's this question, well, why are we observing this pattern? Also, at a more micro level, they're looking at how the units are working, and they came up with this idea that there are sort of ideas about gaps and laps. And gaps are distances between units as you're iterating them, and laps are, of course, if they overlap. And there's a picture of, you can see some gaps there, I think, not laps, but gaps in the photograph. So that leads into day 2, and this is where the teacher gives the students a challenge. She's given them a standard unit, it's the length of her foot. It's important here, I think, to get away from just feet and inches or centimetres and metres, whatever you want to use, and get them to understand these are units and you can define them. So she's using her own foot as the unit, and she's asking them to create a path with a measure of 4 times that unit, 4 times her foot. She takes photos of the student strategies, and the class ends up discussing the problems that they see and the way it works. She's challenged each pair, the students are working in pairs, to cut a strip of paper just as long as that path, that is that 4 units. And then at the end, they're going to compare those lengths of those strips of paper. And of course, what happens? Actually, they come up with different lengths. And this is a bit of a puzzle for the students. So they have to go back and investigate why. And they're going to use the discussion and the teacher's photos to try and do that. And then, of course, this is when the gaps and laps come up again. And you can see, I think if you look carefully in that photo, that you can see there are some gaps that are systemically being invoked there. Now, I promised to take you a little bit down into the details of the construct map, and here's where I do that. And you can see here that we have a span across 3 levels here, from level 1 to level 3. But I've laid out all the levels all the sub-levels, I should say, of level 2. And you can see there's quite a lot of them. These are different things you have to master if you want to go from that classic level 1 of just comparing things. As you go up to this idea, you really can reuse or iterate a unit as you measure. And this particular class here, this activity, was really working on getting them to go on from just a sort of intuitive idea of tiling, that is, iterating the units, to how to really iterate them well to make a measure. So that's the sort of thing that's going on in this classroom. Now, as well as looking at that level, we can now actually find ways to record it. One of the things that's been difficult is that it's very ephemeral. It's what happens daily and hourly in the classroom. So to help teachers get at their own teaching, to help them look at other teachers' teaching in detail, we've developed a thing called TOTS, the Teacher Observation Tools. And it's an iPad application, and it allows them to walk around and gather data. And the idea is it's actually being used while the teachers are teaching. And here's a sample screenshot to give you an idea of the sort of things that go on as a teacher walks around. So here's a case where a teacher they're walking around a particular day. They note the date. That actually gets recorded automatically. They note that they're working on this level 3A, theory of the measurement of length. They can take a photograph of what they see, and you can see here there's the students doing some of this this measuring with this teacher's foot unit, and the teacher can actually circle things to show particular things they're interested in. She can take some notes. Here's some notes she made. She can note which students are involved. If she took a video, that could be put here. And down the bottom here, there's some sort of examples that actually are sort of from our library of examples of what other people have thought about this. So there's ways of recording the things that are going on in the classroom in an important and detailed and directed way towards the things that are being taught. These can be displayed in various ways. This is just a very simple recording of one particular grade. This is a grade 1 class. And we can see that the teacher is observing all these different, these are actually the sublevels, as you can see. They're doing it way down at this fine grain level. I will note what year it was. This was a tough year, and so the data is somewhat ragged. The classes were staying home sometimes and then getting to come in again. So there's quite a bit of breaks in here in this data that we're gathering. Nevertheless, you'll see there are some consistencies. So this is just recording what did the teacher see in the classroom. It's not noted back to the student in this case. But we can see there's a gentle uplift as they're going through this set of experiences. Not a huge range of change. What we can also do, though, then is read it into the same sort of report generating device like we get out of BAS. And so here's a picture of that done in the same way with the level 1, level 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the same colours, just so that it's consistent. And by the way, this is early on in the year, so it's concentrated down the lower end. We can see the same sort of symbolism. The little dots are where each of the students are. The bands are showing the confidence interval. You can see immediately that these are really quite a lot broader, at least most of them are quite a lot broader than they were for the BAS. And that's because these are instantaneous observations. There aren't that many for each kid. And of course, some of them, there's only a few observations. So you have to be careful in the sort of interpretation you do. Although some of them, clearly they have quite a lot of information because they're quite a lot narrower there. So we have this way now of communicating between the meso level and the micro level. And in fact, here's a map of that. Now, this is a complicated version of that right map you saw earlier. Again, you can see here are the levels of the construct. Here are those items in BAS. There's quite a lot more of them shown here because we did actually over the year run that assessment quite a number of times with different subsets of items. On the right-hand side here, we see a very different array here. This is sort of a cloud of information. And this is the representation of the TOTS data. These are all those observations that were done. And it's quite distinctly different from the representation of these BAS items. And at first when I saw this, I was startled by this. I thought, we've made a terrible mistake. It doesn't make any sense. Why are they there? But then when we thought about it and went back and looked at what we were observing and comparing the data, we realized that actually this makes a great deal of sense, because to observe a kid in a structured lesson actually display something, that's actually quite a lot easier for it to happen than when we put them in an assessment situation, sit them down in front of their laptop and get them to answer some items. So the fact that these are lower is not a problem. It's actually an educationally important observation because this is helping them learn and this is displaying where they got to. We can see over on the left-hand side here now summaries of 3 different pieces of information. This was the pre-test. This is the post-test. And we can see that actually there's quite a bit of gain from the pre-test to the post-test. It's about a logit on average. These are the units, which are along the right-hand side here. They're the log of the odds. Don't worry too much about that, but you can make sense of them once you get used to them. One thing that's very interesting here, not only is there gain from the pre-test to the post-test, in the middle here we've got the TOTS. And what you can see here is something that's fascinating. We can see that when the kids are learning this, they're actually displaying both lower performances and higher performances. This is what's going on in the classroom. It's scaffolding children, it's challenging them and scaffolding them to do better. The other major feature here is this bar in the middle, and I've got to say I think that really just represents the fact that there wasn't a lot of information about many kids, and so they end up being located somewhere here in the middle. But really the more interesting thing is this range that we see. When those kids have experienced this range and then they come back and they're answering these items on their own, there is a considerable gain. And in fact, it reflects for some of the best kids that they've not only done it in the structured situation, they've been able to repeat it as well. I'm going to show you a little bit more, a similar map, this second one here. This has a little more detail, by the way. We have this first one, the green one, was the fall, and this is the spring of the same year. And you can see that what's happened between fall and spring, the classroom conversations have moved up. So this lower end, which was quite a lot of in the first semester, has almost gone away. Most kids have moved up. They're up higher up here. They've moved a little bit higher. There's some kids that were at the top anyway. I mean, there's always some kids like that who are doing well, no matter what you do in the classroom. It's great that there's such kids. But over here, we see the grades. This was actually done in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5. And you can see here they are arrayed. This is the means, the averages at the beginning of the year in the pre-test. We can see by the time they get to the post-test, all of the grades have moved up approximately one level. And it's also about one logit, it turns out. You shouldn't be too surprised that you might expect, well, why aren't the grade 4s way up here? Well, the thing is that this really hadn't been taught in these schools at all, this topic. It wasn't there in the state test, so it's not the sort of thing that they get taught. So that's why they start off all about the same. Again, we can see that the grades, when they're in action in the classroom, they're actually engaging both at the lower level and way above that they were able to do at the pre-test. Later on, we can see them moving on, and there's results here for these 3 grades. We didn't gather as much data as we wanted to in 2 of the grades, so it's only 3 of the grades are represented there. But of course, this is the action that's led to the gain we see here in the post-test. So here we can see the 2 levels acting together. We can see how we can use the meso level to see the big picture of what's going on in the classroom, the big picture of the gain, and we can see the micro level telling us what's going on in the classroom itself. Thus, get to my conclusion. We see that this work helps us create the possibility of more robust classroom assessment. We will need to integrate across these grain sizes to understand student performance and to represent it. And more importantly, we can see that growth that's so important that we want to see. And at the same time, this is making this assessment accountable to students and teachers. And this is a different use of the term accountable. Usually when we say accountability, it's way to the top. We're talking to the policy makers and so on, the administrators. But my colleague Rich Lehrer has been promoting the idea that the most important sort of accountability is the accountability within the classroom, that the assessment should be making a difference within the classroom. And I think that's an important idea. So I can now look back and summarise at my topic. The micro level. Working at this micro level, it helps teachers record their observations about what's happening in place in their classrooms and plan for that next micro instructional event. And they can look back and see where they've been successful in the action going on in the classroom. At the meso level, that helps teachers think about the outcomes from units of instruction, to think about the next phase. It might be the next week, it might be the next 2 weeks. It's something where they look back. It's much, much more detailed and much, much more fine-grained than, of course, what we think of as normally going on in standardised tests. And so, my answer to the question I asked about the right grain size is that both micro and meso are needed. And we need to support that as we develop ideas about measurement and assessment. And that's all I have to say today. Thank you. So I will stop screen sharing.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for this wonderful presentation. And again, congratulations on your award. And I'm going to turn to George Wimberly, who will be sharing audience questions.
Great, thank you so much. Professor Wilson, that's an excellent lecture. Learned a lot about assessment here, and it seems that a lot of the audience members have questions that are coming in the Q&A box. Well, the first question, a lot of these questions that have come through have been about the classroom and teachers. One of the questions has been, how is that you deal with uncertainty and error when you're dealing with teachers? How do teachers understand the uncertainty that's in the BAS and in the TOTS models?
Well, the uncertainty at the TOTS level, I think, is reflected in the fact that when a teacher is uncertain, they'll try and look again. Now, I don't know that every time they think that they end up doing it, but in fact, what you find is that there's a sort of a bit of a peak in how often teachers are looking at particular issues, and I think that's the point at which they're saying, well, is that really happening or not? And so that's a fine-grained sort of way of thinking about the micro level. I didn't show any of that sort of action. To be honest, in the year we gathered that data, the schools were under great stress, and it was a bit ragged. So I think it was been hard for us to pull that out of that data. We now have the beginning of another year of data, and I think we're going to be able to get down to that level and see that sort of thing happening. At the meso level, we actually get standard errors, which are the traditional statistical way of dealing with that. But that's not really what the teachers are worried about. I think the teachers are more concerned about how do I interpret this? They're the people in the classroom who are going to make the decisions anyway. So I'm not sure that we should be worrying them too much about standard errors. I want them to get an idea and work with it and self-observe. And in fact, that's really what the TOTS is about, is this idea that you look back and you say, did it work? And that's the answer to uncertainty, I think, rather than a statistical idea about uncertainty. But we can calculate that if we need to. And we do display it, as you saw, in those uncertainty bands around the student locations.
Thank you. Another question is then, how is it that researchers are working with teachers and with schools to enhance the curriculum now based on some of your findings in the study? And could you provide some examples?
Well, I certainly think that this way of sending a foundation for fractions is derived from really good maths education research and maths curriculum development. And I think that's the sort of that my partners, Rich and Leona in particular, bring into the project. But it's not just that you have to know how to design a curriculum to invoke those sorts of good ideas of embodying fractions. You have to be able to help teachers actually use them. And they use a very intensive professional development program where they go out before the year starts and they're working with the teachers. The teachers themselves are working through the assessments and the activities amongst themselves initially. And so that it's something that they become very familiar with. And then they can more easily teach within that mode to their students. So I think that's a really incredibly important part of what we're doing here. Those gains which you saw, which I think are quite spectacular gains, especially given the difficult year they were in, are, I think, probably more due to that professional development and the fact that we can feed back to teachers the information about how well they're doing. I think they're the important ingredients here.
Can you say a little bit more about the validity of your construct? Do you get expert input based on your previous work? More about that?
Well, the curriculum aspect of it is based very thoroughly on a learning sciences approach to maths education. And there's plenty of literature about this idea of embodying something complicated like fractions and so on and rational numbers in the physical world. And so that, I think, is an important, that's a change I think we're seeing in many areas in early STEM in particular. And I think that that literature is informing this quite strongly. The particulars of the curriculum, though, are something that are not present in that sort of level of theory. So this is something that the professional development process actually, I think, is a learning process for both the teachers and the people teaching about the instruction. So they're learning as they go along better ways to embody those ideas. And I certainly see this, where I see it is in the assessments, because the assessments that we've got at the end are really quite different to the ones we have at the beginning. You can see the same ideas in there, but how you get kids to appreciate what you're trying to make, how you ask the question so they'll give you the right sort of information, and how you then interpret it. That is something that isn't in the theory. It's not in education theory. It's really there in the understanding of what you're aiming at. And so partly I see the validity of that is in the process itself. Now, we have done an evaluation of a similar program. We haven't evaluated this one yet because we haven't quite finished it. We've done a formal evaluation of a similar curriculum in statistics for middle school students. It's so similarly radical in the way it looks, that it's not just about calculating mean, medians and modes, which is what they seem to get taught, but actually getting them to think about what's a research question and how does some data inform it and how do I then calculate statistics about it that get back to my question, and really teaching that cycle to students. And here we have seen quite radical gains, well documented in a formal evaluation situation. And I hope we'll get to do that for this one on geometry. We need to get support for that, but I'm just whispering that and hope that somebody will help us with that.
Great, thank you. Lots of good questions are coming in. Can you speak a bit more about any sample size requirements in this work?
Well, I mean, I think you naturally want to have, every time you go into a classroom with a teacher, that's in one level, that's an N of one, because it's the teacher doing that. So you have to work with multiple classrooms. That's one thing. And classrooms come in their fairly natural sizes, which the way that we've been working is within a school, because we see it as a whole school culture that's going on. And we've been, I should really say, have been attracting people from other schools as the success has been observed. So it's sort of snowballing in that effect. But so we're getting numbers when we look across the whole school, 400 or so is the sort of numbers we get across the different classrooms in that school. There's certainly big enough numbers that, when we look at standard errors of gains and things like that, they're definitely statistically significant. The challenge more is to put the effect size into a reasonable sort of a frame. It's a little challenging here in this one because, as you noted, in the very initial year at the pretest, all the grades were about the same. So there was actually no sort of natural growth that we were observing. So we're still fighting a bit with ourselves about how to express in an effect size the gains we're getting there. In the statistics one, it was easier. We had some sort of well-known sort of metrics there that we can use, and so we could make the effect size more easily interpretable.
Great, thank you. Other questions that come up about just things that are useful for teachers and very practical. Mm-hmm. Are there other ways of, say, depicting a concept like greater appreciation of history that comes up here, or in writing, in playwriting, production, means some way of that you can have a concept map and statistical reports that really do have some meaning and are sort of easy to interpret for the layperson?
Well, even though I did start off with that challenging example, I have mainly worked within maths and science, and that's sort of somewhat to my disappointment. Unfortunately, it's probably due to the fact that there's more money from NSF to do that sort of thing than there is from, whatever you might get for other areas. And I do think that working in areas like English language arts and humanities is extremely important. And I think these are susceptible to the same sorts of analysis. I think the analogy to the concept maps are in fact those sub-levels within each level. In some sense, those are, as I said, they're not linearly ordered, the sub-levels. That's an array of ideas and things. We have been looking at some possibilities for sort of lateral connections across them. It's a lot more complicated to do that, and you do need larger samples. So we've seen that as a sort of a lesser goal than at least getting this major framing of the levels of sophistication to help teachers get an idea of what they need to convey at a larger, as I said, rather than the micro, but this meso level of scale.
Thanks. You just mentioned something about the sublevels of the constructs here, and that they're not linear. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, we do. As you'll notice, we had the example I showed 2 A, B, C, D, E, F. So we actually had all those levels, sub-levels within level 2 for theory of measurement length. And they tend to be somewhat ordered in difficulty, but there's clearly a huge overlap in them. And it's not really, that's not the major issue, I think. What we're more interested in doing is doing work where we try and figure out, well, what's a requirement? What do you need to know? You can do that logically, but then you also want to know, does that logic that I'm applying, is that what applies to the students themselves? So we're trying to get some empirical information about that. I think we do have a basis for that in the data we're gathering this year. I didn't feel we did last year because it was, as I said, sort of ragged by the fact that the schools were often closed for quite long periods. And so we were getting intermittent data in a sense that amongst what I showed mainly. But I think this year we're going to do better. I don't have an a priori plan for how to do that. I know we have relevant data. And I think we can make something of it, but it will be future work for us.
So we're looking toward the future. Can you say some things about the sustainability of this work and how feasible the work is once, say, the funding from NSF ends and the university support for these teachers is no longer present?
Well, I think that what we have seen, for instance, is that the school that's been involved in this has gone from fairly low ratings in the state tests to really being quite good relative to their district. And there's been a lot of motivation gained through that. And I think that's motivation for sustainability. I think the main thing that means it will be sustained, though, is probably not the sort of reports that I showed today, though, but it's probably more important is the fact that the teachers are working together on it, that the teachers feel satisfied with it, and tell other teachers that this is a good thing. I think that's the best sign that it's sustainable. I do wish that there was more assistance available, more support for teachers to have help in doing this sort of in-classroom assessment, rather than spending the millions of dollars that people do on the large-scale assessment, which, although I'm sure it's good for administrators and policymakers, doesn't really help education in the classroom at all, I don't think. So maybe we need to be thinking about where money should be spent, where research should be focused. I'm hoping that that's one of the things that will come to change.
Thank you. And can you also address how you're dealing with, say, confounding variables in dealing with students?
Well, I mean, this is done within one school and within the set of classrooms that exist in that school. So there's no unconfounding the fact that, the conditions in the state where this was being carried out and the conditions of that school within its school district are simply embedded in what we did. I mean, in some sense, gains are gains, and so long as you can make sense of them, that's good to know about. It was clear from our pretest that no gains had been made before we arrived at any of the grade levels. So we went from a point of 0 gains to really quite a lot of gain. I think that's interesting regardless of the setting of the school. This is, by the way, this is not a privileged school of any sort. It's a very ordinary school. I'm not going to say who it is or that, because I think that's important for privacy, but you would be satisfied, I think, that this was not a specially privileged school in some way. It's a really typical school and has minority and recent immigrants groups quite prevalent.
Great, thank you. I know we have a little more time left here, and I know
good. That's a great question.
For questions, you're getting lots of good questions. One thing is a question going back sort of the teachers. Is there a way, I say, identifying bad items on a test here?
Well, we certainly work at the MISO level. There are fixed items, and we gather information about them. And the sort of work I do in assessment, I got to say that I think it's slow research, because we take a couple of years to come up with a good set of items, and we really do pay a lot of attention to how individual items work, both in an absolute sense and also with respect to the set of items that we develop. So we do get good information about that. I can't answer for the TOTS level, which is going on in the classroom at any one time. What I think we do examine there during as I said, we have these professional development sessions, and you do observe what the teachers are talking about, and you do hear them give examples. And I think that's the sort of the validity check on the TOTS level, the micro level. There are, by the way, I will also add, there are observers in these classrooms. They're not every day, everywhere, but there are also observers who are also doing some of this work. So there is a way of looking at it. I don't think it's quite at the detailed level as for the MISO level. It's because they're ephemeral events, the micro level.
Another question's come up. Does this process help personalization of learning? Can you measure if, say, slow learners are moved to an average level because of teaching?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I don't think we've really stopped to examine that. As I said, we felt our data from last time was somewhat ragged, and of course that's going to make it hard to pull those things apart. I'm hoping that this year we will have a more regular set of observations, so we will be able to know. We will be able to note relative gain at the individual level, I think, and so that's something we'll be able to document. Making sense of it, of course, is another thing, but I think just even documenting it is an important thing to be able to do.
Great, thank you. Sort of time for one more question here. Okay. And with lots of course, researchers here who are tuning in here to today's lecture. Can you talk a little bit about your software that might be available for doing the right maps, and that may be open source software, as well as any publications that you may have?
Sure. So just into publications that the one I mentioned on the slide, and that you'll be able to get the slides later, by the way, as well as the video of this. That's a very recent publication in Frontiers in Education by myself and Rich Lehrer, and that does document both the MISO level software, shows examples of it. It's a piece of software under development at the moment. We are hoping to make it more broadly available. I would say it's in beta test right now. We've gone beyond alpha test. I don't know that it's fully ready for public release. I use it in my introductory measurement class, so I've got 30 students at the moment struggling with bits of it. So we're trying to make it smoother. I do hope it will be very broadly available in the next year. We're also developing, it's in English, there's a Spanish language version of it that's being developed too. So that's there. TOTS is in sort of early, it's not in its later stage of development. I can't speak to when that will be available. I think the idea is what's important right now. I am hoping that we'll be able to put the two together and not just speak of them as separate, although it's for pragmatic reasons it's turned out to be better to keep them apart while we've been working on them.
Great, thank you. And I have just for a moment ask one sort of last question, something I was curious about too, sort of a career award of sort type of question. What conclusions have you reached through your work that you've been most surprised by?
Well, it is a challenging question. What's been surprising? I guess I've been surprised at how long it's taken. I really started doing the background. As I said, I was thinking about this in 1976. That was when those pictures were taken. I did a lot of. My PhD was training in what I'd say the background for it, which is sort of the psychometrics of it and thinking about practicalities of assessment. I started working on a project along these lines in 1991 with a guy called Herb Thier at Lawrence Hall of Science. And it's taken a long time to get to this. It really is slow research. Measurement is tough. It's a tough thing to take on. And if you really want to be innovative and you really want to get the sort of detailed information I think that teachers need, it does take a long time. And I think we've, career level, we've got some examples that I think people will be able to see. And I think it'll help. It'll make it quicker for people to do the same thing, watching, having examples of successful ones. But it's not easy work. I say to myself, when I was learning Latin back in high school, my teachers would say to me, the Romans were teaching 2,000 years ago. And I think we have to take that sort of level of perspective. If we really want to make a big difference, we've got a perspective of thousands of years of education occurring. And how much better is it in the classroom today than those Romans were 2,000 years ago? There's something to sort of a sobering thing to think about. If we made a bit of difference with this, if we do eventually make a bit of difference, I'll be very pleased.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking time to answer the questions and for your lecture. And I'm going to turn things back over to Professor Solano Flores.
Well, unfortunately, we are at the end of our event today. We enjoyed very much the presentation. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for all these people who organized the event, and thank you to the audience for their patience. It has taken several months, and I think that it was great to finally hear what Mark has to say. So it's time to wrap up. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who came. Thank you those who asked questions. I appreciate it.
And remember that the information will be available online.